All right. Hello, hello. Welcome back to Black Mental Health Matters. I'm Dr. Carrie Ann Williams. I'm a psychiatrist practicing here in Massachusetts. And this is a talk show that's about everything related to mental wellness in the Black community. So if you have any questions or comments throughout the show, you can just drop a question or comment in the, in the comment section, and I'll be able to see that and we'll be able to answer any questions that you may have. And today I have with me Jenese Brownhill. And she is a social worker that has over 13 years experience in the mental health field. She's an expert at trauma-informed community-based services. She's worked in all different kinds of settings, and she's been on the show before talking about emotional healing. And so today we're going to be doing part 2 of that discussion. So Jenese, welcome to the show.
Hi, thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here to continue this conversation really about trauma.
And so tell us again a little bit about yourself and why this topic of emotional healing is worthy of discussion.
Yes. So like you said, I've been in the field for 13 plus years. It comes up in the work in different ways. I work primarily with youth who've become involved within the juvenile justice system. But for many years, I've had my private practice where I mostly treat adults who are dealing with long-term effects of trauma. I have these conversations in my everyday life with friends and families, just about everyone in terms of what they're experiencing, making sense of it, and finding helpful ways to find healing. I think one of the things that we realize is trauma interrupts our life in many ways. And a lot of people, which I'm so encouraged by, or putting themselves on a path of healing and recovery from different things that may have happened to them. And so I find it necessary to have this helpful discussion because, again, lots of these conversations are happening in the therapeutic space between a therapist, but we realize that not everyone is in the space or financial position to access this. So it's just different ways to talk about how one can bring about healing to their lives.
Yeah. As we talk about emotional healing, last time we spoke about all these different things. I mean, we spoke about how to ground yourself, sometimes using routines, how it's important to label things, because if you label it, you can kind of come to accept things and be able to make conscious decisions around them.
Yeah.
We spoke about kind of even just little sensory things like using fragrances, using movement. And I felt like even at the end of that discussion that there was still more that we could talk about, that there was just a tip of the iceberg.
Yes.
And so, I brought you back on the show. I wanted to kind of ask you about, what are some other ways that we can maybe expand on what we spoke about before? And, what do you think, are ways that we can continue to kind of move forward with that discussion?
Yes. In thinking about continuing that conversation, I thought a good place to start would be to focus on body, understanding how trauma impacts our body, the type of trauma that we're thinking about, emotional trauma. Oftentimes, people don't often make that association, but in my years and kind of like how I was trained, we have to establish safety within an individual body in order for later processing of the trauma of what happened to them. So I thought it might be helpful to really start there, so that our viewers could understand and maybe make sense of what's happening to them, or maybe explore it if it hasn't come up with them. So the reality is trauma lives in our body. And the body, and with that said, it provides a necessary tool for us to really access some of these experiences that we're having, early childhood trauma, I think we talked about the last time, some trauma along the way, in terms of interpersonal hurt, or just everyday life, being, a Black person, Black or brown person, just like really accessing. So I wanted to focus specifically on the body because it's often overlooked and not really understood. And I think bringing it together in this overall conversation about trauma and healing, it's a great place to start.
Yeah. And of course, trauma is held in the body. I
Yeah.
think so many times, that's one of the things that's poorly understood about trauma, even in our legal system.
Yes.
People will expect someone who's been traumatized to remember all the details of what happened and what
Mm-hmm.
color shirt was this person wearing and did they have facial hair and this, that, and the other. And if you can't remember all of those details, people think, oh, maybe you're lying. And they don't
Yeah.
realize that trauma is held actually in the body and in the senses. And when it comes to clear kind of visual and verbal memories, it's kind of a little bit more spotty. It's kind of a little bit more shaky. So people will remember images, certain
Yes.
things, but they may not remember a full narrative. So then when they come to the therapy session and the therapist says, tell me about what happened or tell me about what you're experiencing, that person might freeze and say, I don't even know where to start. I
Mm-hmm.
don't know how to explain to you. How can I
Mm-hmm.
explain to you something that I've experienced primarily in a sensory way? And
Mm-hmm.
from our kind of what we know about how the brain works, we have kind of these two areas. They're all connected, but there is the part of the brain that houses a lot of the things that are automatic, things that just kind of like the body just experiences, that would include emotions and sensations. And then there's a
Mm-hmm.
part of the brain that is more intentional. It helps us
Mm-hmm.
with our planning or organization, with how to describe things in words. Those two parts of the brain work together. When people are experiencing an overwhelming stressor, the part of the brain that's responsible for really thinking, planning, and organizing kind of gets shut down. And the part
Mm-hmm.
that's activated is that fight or flight response that just says run. It just
Yes.
says act. It says
Yes.
freeze. It says hide. Um, and it kind of goes into sensory mode. So when the
Yes.
person comes out of the trauma, what their body was most impacted by was the senses, that kind of the sensory experience of what they went through.
Yes.
So now you go to this therapy session and someone says, tell me about what happened. And you're like, I don't know how to describe because it's a feeling.
Yes.
And I think sometimes we are expecting people to kind of process everything by talking, and some people do. Some people absolutely, talking about things can be helpful because it can help you to
Mm-hmm.
organize all those feelings. But
Mm-hmm.
I think where you're going is sometimes we neglect focusing on, well, how do we actually help people heal at the level of the body?
Yes.
You
Yes.
know?
And I think with someone coming in like that, and one of the beauty that I have with therapists is it doesn't matter what the truth is, it's their truth. And you find over time they might be better able to put the pieces together in terms of what happened to them. So what trauma is just like really a normal, I think, response to abnormal events happening to them. So we start by getting that individual to go back in their body, to really talk about it. And when clients see me, the first thing I try to address or have them think about is safety. It doesn't help if we're going to really go in and kind of get into all the details of what happened. It's just like really focusing on the here and now. What are you experiencing? Are you even aware that you're here? Sometimes they're just really nervous and kind of getting out that story or what happened to them. So we often start by like talking about safety, emotional safety. A lot of the time that's foreign to a lot of people because it's just like they've just been on survival mode, like you've saying, flight, fright, freeze. And so you're introducing language for them to be attuned with what's going on, what kind of response that you're having. So the therapeutic session becomes a space where you're establishing safety and in a way to, if possible, process some of those, or really just building in tools that may allow for later processing. I've seen that work so many times where a lot of people come in, they really want to dive into making sense of what happened to them, and we can't really start there. And I think going into the body, it's a great place to slowing them down. So the first thing sometimes we will focus on, and these are generally accessible, it's slowing down by noticing the breath. Breathing has been heavily research. It helps with our immune system, but it also helps with psychological and emotional stress. Focusing on that breath, it just really regulates your body. And so what might seem like, why are we focusing on breathing so much? It's really helpful in keeping that individual present and grounded in the moment. And when you're noticing your breath, and sometimes we do co-regulation too, in terms of like, I'll model it for you, depending on what state the individual is coming into the session. They often find that they're opened up a little bit, where they're, really, like I said, present in the moment, and they don't have to be on that go feeling and really feeling out of control with their bodies.
So you spoke initially about this feeling of safety.
Yes.
Of feeling safe in your body. And I want to pause and talk about that a little bit, because it was definitely not, you're right, this kind of language that people are not really familiar with. And when they first come in, they may not even realize that that's what they're going through. Like you mentioned, you're kind of giving them that language to describe, here's what's happening, is I actually don't really feel safe in my body. And that, imagine that can take a few forms. So one is kind of like not trusting your body to do what you need it to do.
Yeah.
But might be one of them. So maybe depending on the kind of trauma a person experienced, their body froze up when they should have run away. And so, now it's like this disconnection from your body that didn't do what you needed it to do.
Yes.
And there's any kind of a whole host of things that sometimes a person ends up doing in a traumatic situation, and they kind of lose trust for their body. But then it may just be other things too. It may be their body was violated in some way, right? So that could be physical abuse, sexual abuse. And so they have developed a different relationship with their body, feeling like their body's broken, or their body is in some way not as valuable. And so there's kind of all these different kind of complicated things that can happen in terms of a person's relationship with their body, and they don't even realize it is not put into words. So it makes sense that initially, so what ends up happening, I guess I should say, is psychologically, there's this way that the brain can slowly start to disconnect from the body, meaning you're still connected physically, but psychologically, you are kind of out of touch. So you may have, for example, you may be depressed, but then you feel it as physical pain.
Yes.
Or you may be stressed out, you feel it as back pain.
Yes.
And it's like a way that your body is kind of telling you, indicating something psychological going on, but you don't connect the two things. And so then you kind of led us in, Jenese, to this idea of starting with breathing, breath work, and how we undervalue breath work. A lot of people will say, oh, that doesn't work for me. I tried deep breathing.
Yes.
And it's not the same thing as just deep breathing, right?
Yes. Yes.
So what do you tell people when they say, I've already tried deep breathing, I don't think that works for me?
Well, I think you have to provide education to people. It's not just like really breathing, just breathing because we all breathe every day. That's how we stay alive, but it's just building their awareness of what's happening. So in kind of going off of the examples that you laid out in terms of an individual dissociating, they're not really present. So, if they're not connected to their breathing, they're not noticing what's happening in their body. Oftentimes they have labored breathing, and they're not even noticing if a situation is triggering to them, that how they might be hyperventilating or like not breathing. Sometimes that happens. Yeah. So you're providing education, and I always start with having the individual notice what's happening to them. And of course, that individual has to be somewhat ready to be on this path, because a lot of this healing journey, it's a lot of education, a lot of things that you're going to be learning, and a lot of things that you're going to be practicing. So you're building an awareness. So I lean into breathing as the first step, because it's the first, or the entry point into building into other body work or other things. It's just like noticing and awareness, which is absolutely necessary for this healing path, or as we go through talking about other ways that we could do body work or movement to help with healing. So it's not just breathing like, oh, breathe so you could just run. It's just like really being intentional. So when you are slowing down, what do you notice? Do you notice that your mind is speeding up, or you're just getting really more nervous or anxious? And so when you're broadening or having that conversation about noticing and having that awareness, it kind of widened the conversation for an individual to notice other things that they may be blocking out. I think you were alluding to this too. So when an individual is in a stress connected to a trauma state, they're dissociating, they're leaving their body, their awareness isn't really there. That happens in our subconscious. And that's why I think it's worth kind of looking at the education and really looking at it. So they're not really aware, but you sitting across from them. I've seen it a lot of time in therapy session. You just see the physiological changes that are happening. And so when you're reflecting back, like, did you notice that you were breathing a little bit harder there? Or it allows the individual to slow down versus that speed through life that you're going on, because it's survival brain, essentially, to slow down and notice like, what was coming up? What other thoughts came up? Or I didn't notice it. Sometimes we start there. So it's not just breathing, it's the education that comes with it, the noticing and the awareness that you're building into yourself and being in your body.
Mm-hmm. So when they start that process of breathing, I think then without someone explaining what they should be looking for, what they should be doing, they may think of it just as breathing slowly.
They're just breathing.
Yeah. But really what they should be doing is using that as a moment to kind of shift their attention, yes, and to start to notice what's going on for them physically as they're doing this breathing process.
Yes. Breathing is such an entryway to noticing other things, and I think when you build awareness, and I like to lean into it, it's just useful for curiosity, and you need to be curious about what's going on in your body in order for you to be on this path that we're hoping that everyone, will kind of put themselves on.
And I imagine that it is difficult for some people because their minds are so busy.
Yes.
And because they, there's a comment here from Deborah Jackson. She says that awareness is so important for being in the present moment and really being able to evaluate the safety of a situation. That is absolutely right. And I imagine that there's some people that they kind of maybe avoid focusing in on their body and that breathing because their minds are so busy. Yes. And I know of some folks that if they have never really addressed their trauma, they're almost trying to be avoidant. Yes. They know that if their mind slows down, they may start to think about bad things or what happened to them. Yeah. So their defense is to keep their mind as busy as possible and to not focus on their body. So it brings me back to this, what you said initially about feeling safe.
Yes.
So, one of the, I think, benefits of having a professional, a therapist working with you, for those that are listening, is that they will kind of help set that stage for you. They'll help to create an atmosphere where you can feel safe to start to kind of enter into this work. And as Deborah says in her comment, is that can even lead to, in the future, being able to evaluate the safety of a situation. Because if you're able to be in touch with your body, then when you enter a situation, your body's giving you signals that the situation is dangerous. You can trust your body. You can be aware of what the changes in your body that are indicating, whether a situation you're in is safe.
Yes. And that's why it's so important to at least talk about this aspect, because that's what trauma does to the body. It just it allows, it interrupts your connection to your body. So, we talk about gut feelings. We'll question that because we no longer recognize that. How we're operating is in that trauma brain and scanning the world for danger sometimes. And even in doing that, we're not recognizing things that are just comes natural to us being human. I think we have the ability to discern what's going on in an environment and how to protect ourselves. But whenever we have this experience, it makes it difficult for a lot of individuals to do it. So I think, really starting, and look, we just started with breathing, and it's just opening up to so many other areas as an entryway. So I always like to start with that. And before we have any other conversation about how we could use our body or access our body as tool for healing.
Yeah. And it's funny because I had a guest on the show in the spring, and her name is Ayana Parent, and she has a recovery model for recovery from substance use. And the entire first month is actually just working on breath.
Yeah.
And it's so interesting how this kind of all ties together, because she, spoke about how there's all these recovery models out there. And one thing that was successful about her model was that getting in touch with your body, increasing your awareness of your body, and just focusing on breath for a while, that led into then the other parts of the model, which include things like movement and other things. So that when you were faced with triggers, you drive by that liquor store and you feel this need to drink, going back to being in touch with your body, the sensations you feel in your body, and that awareness, you can actually use that then as a strategy to help to make the right decision in that moment, because you understand what's going on for you versus just telling somebody, just try not to drink. Like you have this deeper understanding of what's going on in your body.
Yes.
So yeah.
And that's what the therapeutic space allows you to do, and the benefit of it. But there are other ways that people could learn how to pay attention to their breath and noticing it, in terms of meditation practice. I think practices like that, some people may say, I don't know if therapy is for me, but there are other kind of tools in terms of where you're noticing your breath, and you could expand yourself and open yourself or build that awareness of what's going on. So I just wanted to point that out too.
Yeah. And for folks that are listening, listen, even if you're not with a therapist, there are a lot of ways to get access to meditation and some amounts of breath work. I mean, I'm sure there are probably videos on YouTube, or a lot of fitness places have classes or videos that include that. So it's something that person can start off doing on their own for a little bit, because maybe they're feeling so vulnerable. They're not ready to talk to somebody yet, but you can start with some of the meditation on your own using these trained people that offer courses online.
Yes.
And then from there, maybe that's going to be the window to then the next step being being able to meet with someone in person. And, it's interesting because in the buzzword that we use in psychiatry, especially working with children, is we use the word regulation, emotional regulation, and this is one step to being able to regulate your emotions, but it's so much more than just emotional regulation. It really is body awareness, safety, and it's a first step towards healing.
Yes. Definitely. And so with that, I also want to point out that a lot of the things that we're going to be talking about as we continue, and I know it's just like so many, it's really heavily researched. We have leaders in the field that are looking at it in terms of body. I learned a great deal about Bessel van der Kolk, and more recently, Paul Levine, who really talk about, using the body to help with healing. And I know Bessel van der Kolk particularly looked at yoga and its usefulness, in addition to maybe we'll talk a little bit more about yoga, why it's so helpful. Continuing on, I was going to lead to all the other parts, but we'll just slow down and talk about yoga. It's interesting because I think a lot of the things that we see on the internet or other platforms for social media is people doing all these stances, like these difficult stances.
It's like, I'm not flexible.
I know. How could they stretch their bodies that way? And it's just like, and so most people think of yoga as usefulness, or I can't do that. And nothing against that, because I think that takes years of practice, some time. But I think in yoga starts with breathing, like we've talked about a little bit before. But I think what yoga does, and that's why it's so helpful, it's building an awareness within your body. So for you to really befriend your body, essentially. So when you lean into a stretch and you're like, ooch, that hurt, like you might pull back a little bit, but then as you're working through developing the form, you realize what yoga offers us is repetition. And you repeat the postures, the different things that you may have to do week after weeks, and getting at it. And I think the repetition helps us build safety within our body, because the first time you push all the way out, you're like, oh, that hurts so much, I can't do that. So you might lean into that pose a little bit differently, so you're not hurting yourself. In that way, you're training your mind and your body how to incrementally explore and expand yourself that way. Hopefully that makes sense. Versus, and it's not really, I guess the message is, yoga connected to emotional healing shouldn't be about competition, about how quickly you could do the headstand or all the different poses. It's just like you're reconnecting with your body, you're listening to your body. And through repetition and breath work, you are getting centered in your body. And more importantly, having full control of your body versus just like this go that we talk about. So it's offering all of those things in terms of just that practice alone versus, it also teaches us flexibility. Like the first time, maybe you did it, you're like, oh, I can't do that, that's not for me. But over time, as you work through it, you will find that your thinking is different. Or maybe I could use props to help me with this, or maybe I could do it this way. All of that are like really teaching yourselves that, there are different ways to get to the end, the solution, which is like the pose. You're giving yourself love and care, the way you're talking to yourself, and you're building self-esteem. So just that intervention alone just offers a myriad of options in terms of engaging with your body, but just like helping you process some of those things that may just come up in your body just because you've had traumatic past.
Yeah. And I think sometimes when you think about yoga, particularly in the Black community, we sometimes think, oh, that's something that other people do.
Yeah.
And I think it's also been portrayed a certain way on TV.
Definitely.
Because if you ever watch comedies and other shows, you see people in a certain kind of demographic, certain kind of lifestyle are the ones that tend to do yoga on TV. That's how it's represented. But as you mentioned, Jenese, that it's not just about, something fancy that people do because they have money or whatnot. There's so much to it. And you mentioned the repetition. And one of the things that when you talked about repetition, I thought to myself, the word mastery.
Yes.
Because when you do something over and over, you get better at it and you gain a sense of mastery. And in this case, it's mastery over your body, which is so helpful for people, no matter what trauma they've gone through. There's something about gaining mastery over your body that helps you to heal from trauma.
Mm-hmm.
And again, going back to the awareness, in order to do these poses and to do these particular things, you have to have a certain amount of body awareness. You have to be aware of where your body is in space, whether you're in pain, whether you can stretch this far. How do you do this? How do you do that? How do you keep your body safe from overextending yourself? So there's all these things that kind of go into it. And in order to kind of do it properly, they'll also guide you through breathing. So the breathing goes along with the yoga, as you mentioned, that you're doing the breath work to some degree while you're doing the poses. They'll kind of guide you through that as well. And it really can be I think there's some folks that are kind of worried about yoga being a religious practice, and they say, well, I'm not really into that. And so if yoga is not your thing, that's fine. For those listening, you don't have to do yoga. There are other things, and we'll talk about some of that. But there are ways to, I guess I would say, reclaim, it and not necessarily associate it with a particular religion, but just think of it just for what it is, which is just awareness and meditation. You can meditate on what you choose to meditate on.
Definitely. So. And it has proved useful. I want to say with youth, like, for kids who may just be from challenging background, they may not sit and want to talk about what happens. But having 15 minutes or 10 minutes within the school day where they're practicing yoga, it allows them to focus on that activity, leave everything else that may be going on in their homes or community, or just really focus, and it helps with them re-engage. Similar for adults too. Like we continue to talk about, talk therapy is not for everyone. And not every, you want to tap into the full therapeutic effects or benefits, of yoga. So you want to work with someone who understands the body, or understand who, if you're taking a class, who might be in the class and giving you something, how you could lean into it. So I can't stress enough that we need to just really move away from it being connected to a specific religion or what it might be. I think it's a useful tool and way that we could, again, reclaim our body, get familiar with our body, and work towards healing.
Mm-hmm. And so we have breath work, we have yoga.
Yes.
And so where do we go from there?
So the other thing that I have recently learned about, so some people may take to yoga because it seems like a gentler approach, and they're used to stretching or that type of thing. And so weightlifting is something that I recently became aware of. And again, I have to just really do a lot more research on that, because that might be accessible to a lot of people in terms of weightlifting. Notice I didn't say bodybuilding, not to be confused with that. But I think I recently took a training where we got to experience just doing, different things connected to weight. And I just learned that we often utilize, I was utilizing the dominant side. I am comfortable using one side of my body. So what happens is, and I'm not a medical person, so I could imagine if I'm just using one thing or doing one thing over and over, I would imagine that it's training my brain to, respond or to view that as my dominant side. But when I kind of use my less dominant side, I realize my confidence in kind of engaging with the activity, it was just like really off. Like first I couldn't feel like I couldn't do it. It'd feel awkward, and I wanted to stop, to be quite frank. So just taking that alone, where part of the goal in healing is you want to develop a confidence in terms of making sense what happens to you. So the way I connected that to healing is, wow, how many things am I doing that I'm just doing it because it feels natural, or is it helping? And by doing something that wasn't second nature, a little bit awkward, like what was I working out through that? I had to talk to myself a certain way. I had to engage with my body a certain way. I had to problem solve a certain way. So I think that is another thing. And people could do lots of research on it in terms of weightlifting. I know it's one of the things that recently has been introduced to me as something that could really help. And I think too, maybe for people who are struggling with the stronger emotions, such as like anger or those type of thing, I would imagine somehow that would be helpful in terms of moving some of that, just that release of it. And that's what essentially, we want people to think about, what is gonna give you that release or move the trauma in your body from a place where it's not accessible to you. You could say, okay, yeah, I struggle, with this, and I feel it here. And, so for you to move it, even if you think about exercising, the more you do it, your muscle gets stronger. And then before you know it, you could do 100 of something that you started off doing 3 of. That is the idea, to be able to release it, how it's like how the trauma is stored in your body. And that's just like for if you're a visual person, for like a visual depiction of what we're talking about, because again, the emotional trauma that we're talking about is embedded in our subconscious. And this is a way that if you're doing some of these things and you're, expanding yourself that way, you are bringing awareness to it. So that's, keep on going back to that word, like all the different things we talk about is to build awareness and to explore and then see what might work for you.
Yeah. And it's funny. I wouldn't have even guessed that weightlifting would have been something that could have been helpful, but it kind of makes sense. And it's interesting because I think we maybe historically would think of it as something that like a lot of like men do when they have stuff they need to work out, then they start weightlifting and it actually helps them to heal, like helps them to feel better. And we never really stop to think, how did that work? And that it can work for women too. It can work for all people. That you can do weightlifting is it's another type of movement, but it can actually help to kind of release that trauma that's held in the muscles and in the body. It helps to release it in a particular kind of way.
Yeah.
So I never really thought about that. And so that leads into other kinds of movement as well. So for people that maybe don't want to do weightlifting, there might be other things that they can get involved with.
Yes. And my all-time favorite is dancing.
Yeah.
And I think we talked a little bit about it the last time. I think, a lot of the time, another way trauma affects us, like we become rigid people in terms of how we operate in the world. And I think dancing, I don't know who doesn't really dance and isn't expanding themselves. Like you're listening to the music, you're tapping into joy, you're tapping into all the other things that are in the environment. So dancing could be a necessary tool to help you. And, and I would suggest that everyone should just implement dancing. I know with the pandemic now, there used to be a lot of dance classes that are available that may not be readily available, but there are different things that you could do in your home. Put your favorite music on and dance dance at the beginning of the day. Just get up and really move your body, because oftentimes when you're doing that, you're finding or connecting with your source of joy. I think whether it's like the moves, if you have creative moves, or you're listening to your favorite music. But I think it's just this freedom and this openness that we want to encourage and is necessary for healing, because a lot of the times, a lot of the intervention I realized over the years when I practice, it was all cerebral. Like, let's think about trauma. Let's think about trauma. Let's talk about trauma. Let's, like that way in terms of thinking about trauma, but just suggesting that or reminding a client to dance. Like, when was the last time you danced? Oftentimes it's like, oh yeah, I haven't done that in a while, and encouraging that. It just really, engage the individual and connect them to joy.
Yeah. I mean, and there's so many different kinds of dance, right?
Yes.
And I think about how in the Black community, we have like African dance, Afro-Caribbean, Afro-Brazilian, things with drums, percussion instruments. Like you can feel that beat, and you can literally feel the percussion, that beat in your body.
Yes.
Like I don't know if you've been in situations, you probably have, where people have the big loudspeakers with the music.
Yes.
And you can literally, like, it's like thumping. You can literally feel it like thumping in your body because the music is so loud.
Yes.
But it's in a rhythm, it's in time, there's a synchronicity to it.
Yes.
And usually we're just kind of quite annoyed if the music is too loud. But there's an application with the drums and with the percussion that when you dance, when you have music, you can actually, it impacts your body because there are sound waves. And that does create a rhythmicity and synchronicity that can affect your body and your brain waves. So there's kind of like all these things in music and dancing that kind of combine and can be helpful. And I think about this too, is that sometimes I've found some patients or some clients that if they're at a place where they're so kind of not feeling safe in their body, kind of like going back to the very first step, they might not even dance because they're so constricted.
Yes.
They're at a place where it's kind of like, oh, I don't feel comfortable dancing. I don't feel comfortable doing this. And it's kind of like this if they move, they almost just like feel pain if they move because their bodies are holding so much, so
So
tightly.
much.
And
Yes.
so that's when you definitely need to be guided by someone who has training in this that can help you first to establish safety, and then second to maybe think about breath work, and third to kind of get into more movement,
Yeah.
depending on where you are in your healing journey. Some people can jump into movement because they're there and it's helpful.
Yeah.
Some people, they need to start with feeling really safe first and then going through all the steps. So for those that are watching or listening, think about where you are in your journey. Do you need to start off with just feeling safe first and then moving on to doing movement? Or can you start off by, again, joining a dance class or online classes? There are different free classes on YouTube and different places. Get in there, just dance in your living room. You can get your family involved. If you have kids, you can get your kids involved. They don't need to know that it's therapy for you. You just dance.
Yeah, and we saw a lot of videos throughout the pandemic with people just really dancing. I
Yeah.
think that's one of the earliest type of expression, and each culture has its own dance that's unique to them. So I think we could learn a lot. Native Americans dance, like in terms of African drumming, that's like a huge part of it. They weren't doing that for no reason. I think in terms of connecting to your body, your soul, and kind of those around you, if that's accessible, it's highly, highly beneficial in the healing journey. And it's not like you're just dancing off the stress. I think lots of things are happening. You're also breathing. You're opening up yourself. And that's so key. I wish, and I would recommend everyone dance in the morning or whenever, get a midday breakout dance when you feel like there's just like so much tension in your body or stress from the work day. Just put on a music if you can, and just dance.
It lowers cortisol. So you guys know that stress hormone, cortisol.
Yes.
Things like singing and dancing and these activities helps to lower cortisol. And for people that have trauma, they often have chronically elevated levels. And so whatever you can do to try to get that down, you can definitely think about that.
Yeah. Yeah. I will strongly recommend it. So I think the last thing that I had in thinking about trauma and the body, and again, and maybe it's not possible right now, but I like the theater.
Oh,
And
yeah.
and I think I didn't necessarily think about it before, or connect it to this, but I think there's so many things like different folks could get involved with. And again, with COVID, we may just have to look at the different adaptations that are out there, like, but Improv Asylum, I think it's called, where people could just really go and be free, act out a script, be someone else, or just really doing that. I think, again, going in line with that freedom of expression and building confidence, and it's using your voice. That is like the main point. It's using your voice to kind of bring about healing, building confidence, talking through a script, taking on another character, being curious about it. I think it's so helpful. I think a lot of the times folks tend to watch a little TV or just really think about, acting or arts that way. But I would strongly encourage everyone to explore that, or singing, even anything that's like really allowing you to build confidence that way, open up your airway, and being in a trusting environment could easily be helpful. And I know that there's research coming out too in terms of the benefits of those things. So a few things that I, all over the years have been acquainted with, and new things that are coming out that could be explored. And I think that is the good news. There's a vast array of things that different people can access in terms of being on their healing journey. It's not just in the therapy space. There's sometimes you could start off doing these things and you might lead to therapy, or sometimes you start in therapy and it might be recommended, like maybe you explored those things. So I think that is why I get excited to talk about this, because I think there has been a shift in kind of us looking for more accessible ways that people could just talk and heal their traumas.
Yeah. And, you mentioned, theater and improv and, there's just so much good about that.
Yes.
There are so many things that are good about that. And I know not everybody's into that kind of thing, but you mentioned the idea of, just be someone else for a little bit, because you take on a role. And so particularly for improv, where you're kind of like being a little bit more informal, and you're kind of like jumping in and taking someone else's cues and like, saying this or the other, you get to be funny. People kind of are laughing. You get to express a sense of humor. Laughter is pretty good. But also improv has this principle of what they call yes and, which means that you can't really give a wrong answer.
That's right.
So if somebody follows you, they can't judge your answer. They have to just say yes to whatever you just said and then add something else. So there's kind of this sense of like, making a mistake or doing something the wrong way, that kind of judgment is lower. But you also see this like perspective taking. Trauma has a way sometimes of narrowing our perspective. And when you do drama, you have to imagine what someone else is thinking and feeling, and to see both sides and see multiple angles. And doing that over and over, it helps to broaden your perspective as a person in general. So that can be so helpful.
Yes.
It's just, there's so much good about it. There's another like, there's another chance for mastery of certain things, because depending on the role you play, you may play out something that was similar to something you went through in your life, but with an alternate ending. And we've done drama therapy with some of the younger, teenagers, and that's part of what's included is this idea of mastery. Like, what if you're in this scenario? What would you do differently this time?
What would you do? Yeah.
Play out what you wish would have happened. So there's ways to infuse drama, theater, acting in so many different forms. Some people do storytelling.
Yeah.
And that's what they do. They go around and they dramatize their personal story, sharing the aspects they feel comfortable sharing, but they dramatize it and they become like a one-woman show or one-man show. And they do storytelling.
Yes.
And that's one of the ways that they heal. So it's just so much good about about theater. There's so much that we can say. But these are all like great suggestions. I want to thank you so much for coming on and talking about this. Hopefully we can come on again and we'll talk a little bit more about like other like ways to heal, like alternative kind of strategies, because there's so much out there. And over time, I'm gaining the ability to like meet some people. So if anybody's out there listening and you specialize in dance therapy, drama therapy, art therapy, these sorts of things, definitely send me a message, and I would love to talk to you, because I've been so curious about how to incorporate these things in how our clients heal.
Yes, and I appreciate you having me on again and talking about this important topic. I think for many years, trauma, we know the word, but we had to demystify it. What is it? How does it appear in our community? What are some things that we could access? Oftentimes we're giving ourselves permission to access these things. So it's the whole point of talking about it is so people could hear something that they could take and build on and implement in their life. And there's no shame in talking about it, like really saying this happened to me and doing this walk. The more we talk about that as a community, the better we get at healing together when that's possible, or really doing some things on your own. So, getting your friends together, like let's get, maybe we'll go dancing, maybe explaining to them why you're wanting this level of support, or, it's really getting the education, building awareness, building community, so you could move and work through some of hard stuff that you might be dealing with. So I appreciate any opportunity to really talk about it, to share from my experience, whether in practice or personal, in kind of this journey, really. So thank you.
And thanks for all of you that joined today, or those that will be watching the stream afterwards. If you have any questions, definitely let me know. And I hope you'll join me again next week, Sunday, here at 1 p.m. on our live stream. So have a great week.
Bye-bye.